1, go.
All right, welcome everybody. We are back here May 23rd, 2018 Journal Club. We finished our exhaustive New Jersey EMS Fellowship Conference last night with 425 people and a few 7,000 viewers. So pretty exciting stuff. We will post this, when is it going to be posted? Maybe in the next...
Tonight?
Tonight?
Yeah.
We'll post all 6 hours of it. We have some great speakers. Special thanks to Howie Mell, who came in to lecture, and Diane Colello and Scott Phelps, and all of our docs, Joe Shanker, and our whole EMS team. It was a great conference. Next year, not to early talk about, May 20th, 2019, we will be somewhere, maybe back at the Robert Treat Hotel, but we will be somewhere. I'm supposed to tell everybody to put up a like on Facebook so everybody can be aware that we're back here at Journal Club. So we got started a little bit late, sorry about that. I know we had trouble last week with the Wi-Fi, so hopefully we fixed that, but we keep on working for better technology. Any questions, please let us know. As we're going through Journal Club, you can type into your Facebook account, and we'll get your questions, do our best to try and answer them. So we're just going to go today till 2:20, and we're going to start with interesting cases.
For a second, check your mic.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to start with interesting cases. So who's going first, Drew?
Sure, yeah, I can tell you about a case that I had in the ER. It basically was I think he was around 36-year-old, might have been 38-year-old male. He was living with several roommates. He went into the shower and then noticed he was kind of taking a long time. Someone went to go check on him because he was taking up the bathroom, and so they found him kind of slumped on the floor in the bathroom. He wasn't able to speak. He didn't look right. He wasn't really moving his arms, so they called the ambulance. The ambulance got there, and paramedics found him to be having what seemed to be a pretty large stroke. They were only a couple minutes away from the hospital, brought him to the hospital. As soon as we got him into the ER bay, he had a right fixed gaze, he had a prominent facial droop, he basically had no movement of his left arm and a very weak left leg. So it looked like this was a pretty then stroke. We were able to get some imaging, and there was no bleed on his initial CT. We got an angiogram, which then showed that he had a large vessel occlusion.
Thank goodness. So
Yeah.
you did the right thing that the Northeast Revascular Consortium has been saying for 6 years now, to get a CT angiogram with a CT head before you leave the table.
Great.
Right?
Thanks.
6 years. Come to Neck in Rhode Island. I'm running the New Jersey section. My buddy David Van Ellie's running the New York section. And, it's a no-brainer.
Right, and we were careful to include the neck, right, because sometimes these are from dissections.
Right.
I think Dr. Torres has had a couple cases like that, so we got that as well. And as you know, I then grilled the paramedics on what was their field stroke score, right? No, and actually, no, of course, right? It didn't matter at all. This person had a bad stroke. What was it in IHS? I don't know, something bad. We did actually know calculated, but it really doesn't really make that big of a difference. The medics knew this is a bad stroke. They called it in that this is a bad stroke. And that really kind of got the game rolling. We were able to get a neurosurgery consult. We were able to then, we were planning to push TPA because that is what our neurology colleagues like us to do. In advance of that, we already had got transport set up to where the neurosurgery team can do their intervention close by other facility. And actually, as we were approaching him with the TPA, literally had to just show him the vial. His symptoms 100% completely resolved. So this major deficit. And incidentally, when we hooked him to the monitor, he was in AFib, so presumably this is where this guy with presumably no medical problems, except for his new AFib, got his stroke from, but the TPA didn't seem to help him. Good thing we didn't give it to him, or we would have blamed it on the TPA that we fixed him.
Of course, even with NINDS trial based upon 200 some odd patients in 2 study arms, one at 0 time, one at 3 months, and a silly modified Rankin score, which nobody even really heard of before NINDS trial anyway. Nobody got better right away. So if anybody ever tells you at home that they pushed the drug and saw somebody got better, that's based upon no science whatsoever. They got better at 3 months and just moving one limb a little bit better. That's it. So it's not like a whole lot of great stuff. And But your patient it would have been a TPA miracle.
Right.
If you had
It
just-
would have been. It totally would have been. Had the pharmacist brought it up just 2 minutes quicker,
Right.
it would have been a TPA
And
miracle. Everyone would have
what's the rate of intracranial bleeding with TPA? Well, if you go back to NINDS, it was 6.1%, right? But the follow-up studies to that, which was called the Cleveland Area Experience, was 15.7%. So what do people tell patients? They tell patients 6.1 based upon the NINDS trial. Now, sure, I know some people are saying at home, we're getting better, than ever before. We're doing all these great things for patients. We're doing CT perfusion. You had a clear large vessel occlusion, but this guy got better.
And I think even though EMS recognized that this was a major stroke correctly, I think in the area, especially of Don, what if this guy had woken up with this? Then what would we have done? Right? I think it's definitely time to start advancing the conversation of, we know this is a major stroke. We know really probably the best care is getting an interventional, meaning a catheter-directed, take out that clot from the inside out, not just rely on TPA only. And maybe this is kind of where we need to go. The hardest part is about how to pick it. But just like in this case, paramedics walked in the room, didn't touch him, didn't do vital signs, said, "Oh, that's a bad stroke," right? And maybe that's all it takes.
And I'm on board with that, right?
Yeah.
You do everything en route to the hospital. It's totally fine. And Alex reviewed the one paper last night. Well, it was meta-analysis. What is the best freaking pre-hospital stroke score? Because we're all using the wrong stuff. So what are the 3 scores?
The 3 that were pretty much validated to have the highest prediction for large vessel occlusion were the VAN, the Vision Aphasia Neglect score, the VAN score, the NIH stroke scale, and the LA motor scale.
Right, so everybody's using all these different things, and we'll do that forever, and everybody will have another name for another stroke scale, which won't be validated or won't be found to be like the best stroke score. But the best score is the one that you can do en route to the hospital. You don't wait on scene for, right? Because again, they all need imaging tests no matter what. And if they're over 6 hours-ish, they need a perfusion test or their brain, right?
And just to close the loop, we also ended up still transferring this guy, even though his symptoms totally resolved. We don't know when they're going to come back, 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 months, right? He still has the risk factors. He can throw another clot, that clot can move. So he still needs to be in the facility that can then intervene, because if it doesn't resolve, he still needs the intervention. So even if you had these patients, they have a major deficit unseen, maybe it resolves before you get on scene. Maybe it should still be in our minds of, does this person need to go to a facility that's capable of doing
Right.
this?
And I'm more convinced after Dawn that the way you treat strokes is totally based upon your geography, where your comprehensive stroke centers are, where your primary, you can do mechanical thrombectomy. So if you want me to make up a generic protocol for all systems, it's impossible now. Dawn has taught us you got to figure out your geography, and how much further you are from a comprehensive center, and where you can do mechanical thrombectomy, and how many hours it is since onset, and all that stuff.
Right.
And then there's, which we discussed, is there's no clear consensus on should you bypass the closest hospital, and that's still something that's up for debate.
Yeah.
There's no clear consensus to that.
After all, you knew that guy could have been having a bleed, right?
Right, yes.
Because we looked at this
That's right.
literature too, and we wrote a paper about this, and there's no, if you are altered, you're slightly more likely to have a bleed than a stroke. If your diastolic's very high, you're slightly more likely to have a bleed than a stroke. Everything else, I can't figure out, right? All right, that was good. So, and you didn't do anything, you just got the guy in the CAT scan quickly.
Right, yeah.
What other interesting case?
Alex, can you pull that mic towards you, just because we can't hear you that well? Thanks.
So I had a case, it was another emergency department case. It was a middle-aged female complaining of chest pain, difficult to characterize. Had been going on for about 14 to 16 hours. Couldn't really describe it, said it was kind of in the middle of her chest, radiating to the axilla, bilaterally, very just difficult to characterize. And so reports not really in the mood to provide a whole lot of history, doesn't have any medical problems that she reported. And EKG done at triage showed diffuse ST elevations. Pretty much every single lead had some degree of elevation, and AVR had some ST depression. She looked like a pericarditis, again, difficult to characterize for her to characterize the type of pain. So I went ahead and got some labs, gave her some aspirin, Toradol. Pain pretty much significantly improved. She didn't want anything else for pain. She was very comfortable. Just after 15 of Toradol and 324 aspirin. Repeated an EKG, still no change, just all diffuse elevations with the AVR depression. Troponin came back with slightly elevated at 2. After 14 hours since onset, troponin was only 2. So ended up admitting the patient, cardiology, saw the patient, and turned out the troponin ended up trending all the way up to 67. Patient went and had 100% mid-LAD occlusion. So the reason I bring it up is it's the textbook likes to teach us that this is the characteristic EKG for pericarditis, but we all know, and we discuss it all the time, diabetics, females, elderly, all have atypical presentations for an acute MI. And this was one that was very difficult to pick up on, not being able to characterize the pain, no real past medical history, and an EKG that does not fit an LAD pattern. Definitely a lot of different things that can easily distract you from the case, and it definitely distracted me from the case because the textbook says if you have this EKG, it's pericarditis. So the thing that obviously needed to keep in mind was that it's a female, 40, somewhere around there, female with this atypical type chest pain, even though it may not present like the textbook MI, definitely has to be on the differential, and that's from pre-hospital providers and ER providers. We need to keep that on our differentials, just understanding that not everything is going to be coming straight out of the textbook. So interesting case.
A colleague of mine who's an interventional cardiologist, she was telling me that this past year she's had a couple of cases with strokes over 50, and she's capped them and totally clean coronaries. So one she just told me about, the trope was 80 with an appropriate EKG. She took right to the lab, trope of 80 and clean coronaries. And they blame it on myocarditis. And who knows? So I don't know. It's a tough call. When we talked about this, maybe an early ER bedside echo to look for wall motion abnormality, look for any thinning of the wall is always the right answer.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you guys think about this. And pericarditis is, how do you describe pericarditis?
How do you describe the pathophysiology?
So how do people present?
They typically present with pain that's worse with positional changes, so leaning forward typically makes it better, leaning back makes it worse. And they typically describe it as a sharp type pain.
And that's what she had, right?
And that's what she had. It was documented in multiple notes that pain was exacerbated by positional changes, radiating to both axilla. And it was described as a sharp pain initially. Then sometimes later it was like, oh, I don't really know what it's like. So it was very back and forth. And then the NSAIDs making it better, we would think that would kind of go along with the pericarditis. So yeah, it was definitely challenging, but echo is definitely important. The echo that was ultimately done showed some hypokinesis of the apex. But very short hospital course. Patient got stented, did very well. But definitely interesting case. And then from a pre-hospital standpoint, I think the key in that was, the patient came in private vehicle, but happened to present to PCI capable facility. But if you have someone that, they may not have any medical problems, and they have what looks like a pericarditis EKG, does that patient need to go to a cath lab? If they have elevations, they're diffuse. If they would have sent me that, if I would have looked at that from Newark, Beth, where we have our med console, and I would have pulled up the picture of that, and you said 40-something-year-old with sharp chest pain, that EKG, I'd say it's pericarditis. That doesn't necessarily need to go to a cath center, but
Right.
we have EKG changes in a symptomatic patient, maybe that does need to go to a
Luckily, we have
cath
so many
center.
PCI centers in our state.
Exactly. So, yeah, so it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a tough case. What else, Bob, you have one?
Yeah, the other night we had a 16-year-old that went into cardiac arrest, and other than the clinical concern, it's got some operational issues with it. So he's playing basketball, went up for a layup, and it was described as he just tensed right up and collapsed to the floor. When he presented, they started CPR right away. PD arrived, put him on an AED. AED shocked him right away. ALS got there. He was in a PEA. They eventually got a ROSC on him, and the crew realized that the local community hospital did not have was not pediatric capable. Plus, their ICU was still closed from a fire a few weeks ago. So they called for a helicopter to take him to a pediatric center, which was about 35 minutes in either direction of them. They contacted the hospital, the local community hospital, just to confirm that they probably shouldn't take the patient to that hospital. And the ED doc said, yeah, he should go to somewhere else because of our existing situation. So they had the ROSC with them, pretty nasty looking 12 lead, some peak T waves, no real P waves in there. And they did fly him to a pediatric center, which was, like I said, about 25, 30 minutes away. So I thought it was a good catch by the crew that the local community hospital really couldn't handle this patient. He was going to get transferred out right away. And we have checked to do a follow-up on him.
So he's 16 years old, he had a arrest, presumably it was a AFib arrest, so we're all thinking maybe at Holcomb, hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. So we just sent the Holcomb EKG out, and I think the quickest, correct response was Dr. Carr. So, you know what I'm talking about, the Holcomb EKG?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you gave a few clues though, didn't you?
I think I said this is a Holcomb EKG, does anybody know what this is?
Well, I said what's the race and what's the age? And I think you said young African American, young Asian, or something like that. And I said, what's Holcomb?
Do you remember findings for Holcomb EKG?
Yeah, so it's similar to an inferior wall MI. That's what I like to think about it with severe LVH. That's kind of how I think about it in my head. So you can see ST elevations in 2-3 AVF. You can see large T-wave inversions in AVL, and
So large T-wave big thing, right?
Right.
Besides the inferior wall, large T-wave inversion.
Right, notably, if you use Cornell criteria or whatever, basically the R waves are off the side of the EKG. Usually the amplitude's so high you can't even measure them because it's the LVH is so severe. Usually, when it's more obstructive, you'll see the R waves off the page. So. And we've diagnosed that pre-hospitally. We talked about that in a recent journal club, I think. That was a while ago, but a syncope at a barber shop and a 16-year-old kid. He had a EKG concerning, so in the back of an ambulance, we put a probe on his heart, we looked, and we measured the septum, and he met criteria for hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, so we sent him to the appropriate hospital, so that was kind of cool.
So you showed up with EMS in the ambulance, right?
Yes.
To say, we'll bring in a patient with we just diagnosed Holcomb on.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep. Yep, and we called the pediatric emergency department. They said, well, we'll do our own echo. I was like, okay, that's fine.
I mean, you do it too, so.
Yeah, I know. So it was pretty cool.
What else, Bob?
But I can't commend the crew enough, though. I think that is like key, right? Because
Yeah.
really, this EMS is a continuum, and we got to remember that once they get to the ER, it's not like the end of the game. There's more to the story, right? This kid had cardiac arrest. He's going to need some intervention. He's going to need the pediatric cardiologist that can come take a look at him. And if we have to wait 4 hours for an SET transfer because he went to just the nearest hospital, that may actually harm him. And so thinking to what is he going to need next is really
And
key. especially
even
these
they made the
patients.
call to the hospital and say, look,
Right.
this is our situation.
Yeah.
Can you really
That-
handle this? Knowing that
Spectacular.
they didn't do pediatrics and that they had an issue with their ICU still ongoing from a few weeks ago. So I thought that was.
In my opinion, that saves a life just as dramatically as stopping
Yeah.
bleeding on the side of the parkway with a major car wreck.
Yeah.
So you said it was, excuse me, it was 35 minutes in either 30 minutes or so?
Yeah, they were in.
Is that by ground?
Yeah, they were in one of those situations that they weren't close to anything because of their
How
location.
long did it take to get a helicopter there?
The helicopter was about 15 minutes.
Okay, that's what I was curious.
Yeah.
I didn't know, because I know some, depending on where you are geographically,
Yeah.
helicopter.
So geographically, it wasn't this case, but geographically may have been the wrong decision to call helicopter as opposed to go by ground, depending
Yeah.
on where you are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you have
But-
time of day, traffic patterns, all
Yep.
that stuff. And I remember the call, and I remember the time of day of the call, so.
Yeah, but
I
they
was just curious.
they were lucky. They got the helicopter pretty quick to them.
Good. I think it was a great job. I second what you were
Yeah.
saying. That's an excellent job by the group.
Yeah. All right, why don't we go right into the articles? We want to do the bystander article first?
Yeah, it's fine. All right.
So this was, I think, if I remember right, 2017, so it was a little bit older than we usually review, but I've always kind of liked this article. I don't think we did it this year, so I wanted to just go over it.
Yeah, it was about a year ago. It was May of 2017, so May 4th, 2017, so about a year ago. And this is a study coming out of Denmark. So they have a cardiac arrest registry, but this is published in New England Journal. And like I said, this is coming out of Denmark, and this is looking at the effect of bystander interventions on long-term functional outcomes. We like to look at, I think at this point we can all agree, and I know Dr. Parrish spoke about this at the conference last night about, we know that bystander CPR, bystander interventions improve outcomes in terms of ROSC and 30-day survival, but we don't have a lot of studies looking beyond 30 days. This study was excellent in the fact that they looked at a 1-year follow-up period. So 1 year follow-up in post-cardiac, out-of-hospital cardiac arrest patients, I thought was pretty significant. So what they were looking for was the 1-year risk of anoxic brain injury or nursing home admission, and pretty much death from any cause at the 1-year follow-up. And this is only patients who survived that 30-day mark. So what they were looking at was pretty much, we know that the bystander chest compressions, use of an AED can reduce neurologic impairment. The quicker you're able to get compressions, you're able to get defibrillation started, you increase the cerebral perfusion and coronary perfusion. So increases your risk of achieving ROSC. ROSC, however, is often falsely thought of as a great outcome. A ROSC with vegetative state, in my opinion, is not a great outcome. So we're looking at neurologic outcomes. So again, this is why they're looking at the risk of anoxic brain injury, brain damage, nursing home admission. These people, in addition to just the financial care going on for the rest of their life, they're also going to have nursing facility placements, long-term care, round-the-clock care, in addition to everything else that's going on. So just as we get somebody back, they require 24-hour care for the rest of their lives. What is that outcome really doing? Or did we really help them in any way? So this, like I said, was done in Denmark. They looked at June from 2001 to 2012. So they looked at a pretty good period there. And in Denmark, they have the EMS personnel. They systematically report every case of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, and they report whether or not there was bystander intervention. That includes bystander CPR, bystander defibrillation, and whether or not it was an EMS witnessed arrest and EMS initiated resuscitation. Also during that time period, during the 2001 to 2012 time period, there was also an initiative to improve, a nationwide initiative throughout the country to improve awareness of citizens to perform CPR, to get early defibrillation, much like we did here in the US, by placing AEDs in multiple locations, making them readily available, educating the public. That alone is a significant improvement in their system of care, which may have impacted the results of the study. So the study design, they essentially have all 30-day survivors of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, ages 18 and over. And it was published, and these were listed in the Danish Cardiac Arrest Registry, much like our CARES registry. So they looked at patients who were in nursing homes or had anoxic brain injury prior to the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest were excluded. This was looking at people who were out-of-hospital cardiac arrest and never been in a nursing home but now have to be, or did not have any brain damage before but now they do. So they looked at a lot of different factors: the date, the year, the location, bystander witness versus EMS witness, bystander CPR, bystander defibrillation, the amount of time intervals between the call and the attempts at intervention, the initial heart rhythm, and whether or not EMS performed defibrillation as well. So what they did was they got the survivors into 4 different groups. They had no bystander resuscitation whatsoever, bystander CPR with no defibrillation, bystander defibrillation with or without CPR, and then the EMS witnessed cardiac arrest. So those were the 4 subgroups that these survivors were put into. So again, we looked at the 1-year outcome after these patients that survived to the 30 days. So the statistics were they were testing the difference between the groups of patients who were surviving at 30 days and the groups of patients who were not surviving at 30 days in relation to bystander CPR, or bystander interventions, and then how it relates to the calendar year, and the graphs, the figures, actually break it down by year. You can see the trends in outcomes as well. I know AJ covers our statistics as well, so I'll let him talk about it as well. But they were talking about absolute risks of brain damage or nursing home admission. According to bystander admission, EMS witness status were reported together with all-cause mortality. So they reported all of this together. And then they used a Charlson comorbidity index score in addition to adjustments for age and sex. So what they found is pretty much there were 42,000 patients during this time period out of hospital cardiac arrest and had some type of resuscitation. 34,459 were eligible for inclusion in the study. And then out of those 34,000, 2,800 were survivors at 30 days. So 8.3% of their patients survived in 30 days. And then what was of note was that during this time period, they actually noticed the percentage of 30-day survivors was initially 3.9% and it increased from 3.9 to 12.4% for patients. And then patients who received bystander interventions were more likely to be 30-day survivors. So this just confirms what we pretty much know, is that bystander-initiated intervention early on, as soon as possible, really does help improve the outcomes. And this is showing that at 30 days, you're more likely to have a survivor at 30 days. And then it talks about 153 survivors who received bystander defibrillation. 93% of them also received CPR, so that's excellent that we've educated the public to be able to do this, the bystanders to do not just AED and defibrillation, but also CPR. So 93% I think is pretty good. I think there's still room for improvement. This is a Danish study, but I mean, I think this is kind of just helps reinforce what we know, what we should do. The patients also in the bystander CPR group had more often had a shockable rhythm initially than the no bystander CPR group. Then looking at the kind of going further on the outcomes, so you had the 2,800 patients that were 30-day survivors. 9.7 of them died during that 1-year follow-up period. And 310% had anoxic brain damage diagnosed or were admitted to a nursing home. And among those, 359 died during that 1-year follow-up. So what does this really tell us? So pretty much anoxic brain damage diagnosed for those who were admitted to a nursing home during the 1-year follow-up, the rate of that decreased significantly with using a bystander CPR. When you're looking at figure 1, you can see pretty much the different, they have it, figure 1, part A is all 30-day survivers. You can see which ones were bystander witnessed cardiac arrest, EMS witnessed, bystander CPR, bystander defibrillation. What I thought was important to take away from that was the blue bar, for those of you looking at the article on 2001, is pretty low percentage of patients received bystander defibrillation. But as you move that trend going towards 2012, you can see that continually increasing. And same thing with the bystander CPR. 2001 actually had a pretty decent percentage of patients who received bystander CPR. And then that just continues to improve significantly trending towards 2012. Same thing rings true for the 30-day survivors in graph B as well. Then looking at figure 2, I thought was also important, was looking at the outcomes in terms of the death from any cause, the brain damage, but you can look, again, looking at the trends of these things. I mean, you have the decrease in these trends and the event rate of the brain damage, nursing home admission, death, all these things decreased. So, and p-values are listed in the margin on that. And I mean, AJ will talk some more about that as well. But so the big take-home point is kind of belaboring the point, but essentially, all the patients who received some kind of bystander intervention had a lower rate of anoxic brain injury, all-cause mortality, and pretty much better outcomes at that 1-year during that 1-year follow-up. So, what does this mean for us? We need to continue educating the public and educating our providers as well that early defibrillation, early CPR truly does need to be initiated, and our dispatch centers from an EMS standpoint do an excellent job of providing these instructions over the phone, and continuing education, continuing to develop and further reevaluate, and there's always room for improvement in everything that we do. by continuing to make these improvements and changes to adjust the system on a public health perspective as well, I think is phenomenal. And this is, again, this data is through 2012 in the Danish study. I'm curious to know what our numbers are in the CARES registry. Do we record these things? If not, should we be recording them? How, obviously you always have that debate on how factual is it, what was really done, what was not, but having a standardized registry to put it all into, I think is great for data. And then on top of that, from 2000, I know at least for us, and from 2012 to this day, 2018, we've done continuing education on out-of-hospital cardiac arrest and educating the lay public on how to perform defibrillation, CPR, and at the conference that we were at, the EMS Physicians Conference, I know some other countries are doing some pretty amazing things in terms of public education and different community centers and things like that. So I definitely think there's room for improvement in using different populations and different systems to help us kind of factor into our decisions on how we're going to educate our public. So
That was good. AJ, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I actually really like the study. It's very statistically sound. And the reason why I'm stating that is because they went multiple directions and multiple imputation and logistic regression and Poussin in different ways just to see if their effect size changes. And every way they went kept suggesting that when this bystander CPR is effective. And let's see, I can prove this with, let's see, our table on page 8, I think, or 1744. You can see the unadjusted analysis versus the adjusted analysis, and our hazard ratios are barely changing between the unadjusted and adjusted analysis. And this is just a very statistically sound study. I have no real negative critiques of it at all.
So just for education, because I always like to do some stats education so we get smarter, just define for us hazard ratios and maybe take one of the factors and just talk through what the hazard ratio means.
Yeah, so hazard ratio is a little different from like relative risk, because relative risk states the risk for the entire study, whereas a hazard ratio, you can use it as a ratio for any particular point in time. It's calculated a little differently, it's more cumbersome, but it just says for any particular given point in time, we have a decreased risk. For us, we have about a third decreased risk with bystander CPR versus no bystander CPR for any given point in time.
So like pick a spot. How about just the first one, the 0.60 with that confidence interval? So how would you just, like in English, like say what the bystander CPR versus no bystander CPR resuscitation means?
Let's see.
Is the first one on?
Yeah. Okay. So, and journalistically speaking, we're going to decrease by over 1/3 decrease in brain damage versus no bystander resuscitation. So you can interpret this a lot like you're interpreting relative risk and any sort of other RR, because hazard ratio is interpreted quite the same as relative risk. And if you want to look at how many times you can times it, you take the reciprocal of 0.6, and that's how you're going to figure out the multiplication. Let's see for this one. So, and the inverse of that would be our bystander CPR is 1.67 times more likely to survive versus our no bystander resuscitation.
So that's good. So tell me how you got that again?
You take the reciprocal of 0.6.
And why 0. Oh, so the 0.6 is up there. You take
Yeah, it shows you the magnitude of your effect.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's true for everything on that table.
And AJ, I just have one question. it seems like they used 4 different regression methods, all with a different name in front of them. If I invent my own regression method, do I get to name it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, all right.
All right.
I think the one thing that was interesting for me about this and looking at this data too is the death from any cause and looking at bystander defibrillation versus no bystander resuscitation, right? That shows a definite impact. Yes, CPR makes a difference, but the thing that makes the difference is the defibrillation, right? The CPR is buying us time to get to that defibrillation. So having these AEDs and major common centers, it looks, at least from this data pool, that's the thing that really has the most impact.
And that's good. And do we need to talk about the different types of regression analysis used?
I think that's far beyond my interest or understanding. I don't know if it's worth bringing it up. AJ, what do you think?
I mean, the logistic regression in this is mainly just comparing the reference between the two. It's a binary of less than to greater than. Poisson is just counting the differences between it. It's similar to chi-square, but using a logistic regression approach. I don't know how technical you want me to get into it.
So not too technical. So just how about just from the 30,000-foot view? There's multiple different types of regression analysis that can be done in general.
Oh yes, it is. It's very large. I think your normal graduate level regression book is about 1,500 pages to 2,000 with different types of techniques in it.
Okay, that's all right. It's a lot.
I have the book if you guys want to borrow it, AJ sent it to me.
I mean, can you just give me hit me with what are the 2 most common?
Linear.
Simple linear regression and then logistic regression are probably your two most common.
Okay. All right, we want to do any other comments about this study? I always like this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think this stuff is good, and I think this stuff is good. I mean, this is like real, true public health stuff. We spend so much money on interventions that don't work. We have CPR classes that take 8 hours to train people, and that their attention is nothing. Like, how much better can we do if we're just start showing people how to do CPR without all this craziness behind it? Like, do people really need certifications? All the bystanders? Like, can we just literally go out there and teach people how to compress on people's chests and save some people's lives?
So CPR in adults, teaching people in the malls and not giving them any. We always carry cards in our wallet now.
Yeah. What is the
I do have a question for you guys about this study, by the way.
Sure.
So Denmark is twice as likely to be So the U.S. is twice as likely to be obese versus Denmark. Obesity rate in Denmark is about 19%, and the U.S. is about 36%. Do you think obesity could be a methodology issue with inference in the study for the U.S.?
I do.
CPR?
Yeah, I do. I mean, a lot of confounding variables go along with that, but yeah, certainly. I mean, it probably depends on the central obesity versus other stuff.
And I wonder if there's any cultural biases as well. It's just the getting over the hurdle of I'm going to jump in and I'll help this person. The European mindset may be very different than the American mindset. On will I go over and put my hands on their chest?
Right.
And I will imagine it's probably also very different in certain neighborhoods within the United States. There are some places where I've been that people have said, oh, I'm not going to touch this guy in the street because maybe he's faking it and then I'm going to get mugged. And then there's other places that, people will go in and not even think twice about it.
The biggest example I can think of this is kind of the Israeli model where they say, we're just going to go in, there's 50 patients, we're just going to go in and take care of them and get them off the scene. You guys will still be in your meetings about what to do. And it's totally freaking true. We have meetings to fight terrorism instead of just going, taking care of the patients and leaving, or getting rid of the green tags or just doing the work. We do lots and lots of meetings. And sometimes I wonder why, because we spend lots of money on planning for these disasters when we still have people all day long having chest pain and shortness of breath, and that's most of what, we need to take care of.
We're very good about planning meetings, having a meeting to plan the next meeting without getting a whole lot done.
Right.
You guys want to have a meeting?
Yeah, we can have a meeting to have a meeting, but we can plan our next meeting at that one. A couple of things that I did want to mention in regards to that is that one of the things that was mentioned in the paper was that the cardiac arrest rates in Denmark were very similar to the arrest rates in Europe and in the United States. So in terms of the rate of cardiac arrest, again, the cause may or may not be the same just based on different factors and obesity and things like that, but the actual rate of cardiac arrest was very similar from Denmark to comparatively to other countries. And then the other thing was the Charleston, or Carlson, whatever that way they pronounce it, but the comorbidity index score, and you get points for different comorbid conditions, and that it pretty much includes obesity, cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease. There's a lot of different things you can get points for on that.
And I've used that in
increases your
several
score.
studies, by the way, because many journals will ask for that specifically.
Yeah, so I think that's something that is, when we talk about, oh, maybe they had more obesity, maybe they had less. I think, yes, cardiovascular disease is a huge cause of death, especially in the United States, but I mean, cerebrovascular disease as well can play a role. So I think that once you kind of get into multiple comorbidities, I think that's what kind of leads to very similar cardiac arrest rates in multiple different countries, is that the patients included all had multiple comorbidities, or majority had multiple comorbidities.
Right.
Okay.
Bob, should we stop teaching CPR to the public? Should we have just a 30-minute class?
Yeah, I think that.
How about a 30-minute class every 3 months instead of a long class?
Yeah, I think, do it in schools. I think do it,
So
because you
make-
have a captive audience in schools.
So make them go through a CPR something every year or 6 months.
I think certain states are requiring their high school students to have CPR before they can graduate.
Right.
But we can also teach, we're running around teaching everyone how to use Narcan. Why not teach them how to do Narcan and press on someone's chest at the same time?
Well, that's a good question. What do you think about that? So how about an epi auto-injector? And how about naloxone? And how about an AED? And how about CPR? And do it all like in 1 hour?
Yeah, this stuff is not difficult. I really believe that we run ourselves into issues by making these courses way longer than they need to be. The average person probably forgets at least half of what they said. This is not based on anything, this is just my guess. But I would imagine that, people walk out of the room, their heads are spinning, or they're not even paying attention, especially nowadays when everyone's on phones, computers, whatever. They're not paying attention during CPR classes. They take some tests, and then I'm sure they walk out, forget it, within minutes of leaving the room. But forget about that. Go look a month, 2, 3, 4, 6 months out. If they haven't done CPR, there's not a chance that they're going to remember how to do it.
Right.
Why do we make it so complicated?
Right.
Going back to the school subject in terms of increasing how many people do it in school, and some states are requiring. I think there's such a variability in states. My sister was a teacher in another state, and she had just the basic CPR certification just because she did some nannying stuff on the side, but otherwise it was not required. Nobody else really in her school knew anything about CPR. And then a pediatric family member had a SVT as a 6-year-old, and pretty much could tell, hey, my heart's going fast, and is getting short of breath and turning red, and tells the teacher, and the teacher freaks out, has no idea what to do. And should something have happened, not a single person, when looking into it at the school, not a single person knew CPR, had any kind of first aid training. Called the school nurse, which covers 5 different schools, and with the amount of time spent teaching a lot of other things, I think it's very easy, like Josh said. Take an hour once a year or once a quarter, whatever it may be, and just reinforce these things. And because learning it once, and I know Drew presented the epinephrine, the check and inject for administration of epinephrine, but it's one of those where if learning the skill once is great, but reinforcing how to continue to use it and how to do it, because you may learn how to use an AED today, and if you never ever see one, and the next time you need it's 5 years from now, are you going to remember what to do? And I don't know.
We just pulled the data in the state about this idea of letting EMTs draw up epinephrine instead of paying the huge amounts for the auto-injectors. And from nursing studies, it appears that you lose the skill of how to draw it up in roughly 4 months if you don't do it.
Yeah.
So you need some re-education if you don't do it roughly every 4 months. That's interesting. So we're working on that. We're trying to move forward with getting EMTs to drop epinephrine. Many states are doing this. This is not new, and it'll save us a fortune.
We could have TV commercials, 30-second commercials that play 50 times a day.
So you're saying have a course called the layperson course and and do it like every 6 months in high school about like bleeding control, maybe tourniquets, maybe simple stuff.
I mean, imagine if we had, three 1-minute, this is how you do CPR practice sessions during the royal wedding that they had last week. Like, how many people would have learned how to do CPR?
Right.
I would love to talk to
How many
Coke
lives
and-
could be saved if we did this instead of
I would love to talk to Coke and Budweiser. Maybe we can all do a CPR commercial together during the Super Bowl.
Well, there was an ad campaign that the AHA and the British equivalent had with Ken Jeong for the AHA and Vinnie Jones for the British equivalent. 30-second commercial with like staying alive as the backtrack, just talking about just pushing hard and fast. That was it. It was like a 30-second spot. It aired for like 6 months, and then they just went away because commercials cost money. But it's still on YouTube. Like it's a catchy ad, because it's big and flashy and it has like decent music. But like it was an ad campaign that existed. I don't know if they actually showed changes from it.
Maybe the network's got to give this away for free. Do it as a public service to everyone.
We talked to the director of EMS for, I think it was Taiwan, right? The Taiwan...
Singapore.
Singapore, sorry,
Yeah,
Singapore.
that's
Yeah.
Right, and they made great strides doing these same kind of things. There was no formalized training. It was go in there, be a hero, push hard and fast, call the taxi, because every taxi had
has an
AEDs.
AED.
And their cardiac survival went from like almost 0 to major, way above us.
Yes.
I mean, if
And,
we
and
really,
they're developing
But
EMS
they
systems.
are, right, but these systems, even though they're developing, have different politics than we do.
They do.
Right?
That is very
and
true.
that's usually why they can be successful, even when they're not as advanced as we are.
Right, right. I think one of the things that he was trying to give to the American audience was just like make it, try to remove the barriers, right? Just like, it's just go and help. Do your best. It's
Right.
okay if you can't remember. Is it 30-2 or 15? Oh my God.
Right.
It's okay. Just do whatever you can
Totally
do.
right.
That's the best thing.
And
that's
even
what will help.
Paige Healy had a great comment in our generation, trying to reach over 78% of the population has a smartphone. There's an app that talks to you and says, do compressions now at this rate, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll talk to you as you just have to push the button and tell it to start, and it tells you how to do everything.
So have Apple put that on as a,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the issue is getting
But even
people.
if they have it, you have to
As
get
a
people to do it. And that's why I
automatic
think high school, maybe even junior high,
Yeah.
junior high, high school, and college, that you have to do this, made up this course in life or something, where we do all these little, how about when to call 911? Start educating people when they're in junior high. I mean, we do sort of this now, but how about like a standardized course that's across the whole country?
we just did an in-service with 3rd graders last week. And, here's how you do CPR and what you need to do. And they were all over it.
Right. And I would just say, did we do anything on like, direct pressure or bleeding or?
I don't know if they got involved in that.
Right.
Yeah, I think.
But we
we're
taught
running
about
kids.
intubate, so.
You taught them how to intubate?
With the air track.
First pass success.
Good.
Yeah.
Their first pass success was much better than.
I think it's easily doable stuff. I mean, the problem is if we let politics get in the way, when we let finances get in the way of this stuff.
Right.
I
Who's
think if
gonna
you look at
fund
some of the
it?
other
Who's gonna-
countries where you have one system that, where we have everyone, all the calls are coming into one place and everything is one unified system, it's a lot easier to do. I mean, everything is so splintered here. And also, just to get the information out to people, I think is difficult in our country as well, just because of the way that everything is set up. And we do have apps that, people will get alerted to where the nearest AED is or where the CPR is, but they're very limited and they also are costing a lot of money right now. And it's not like access to everyone. I mean, if we really all band together, I believe that we could have people at every CPR within 2 minutes. And not necessarily with an AED, but to do compressions, at least in major metropolitan areas.
Hutzola can do it.
Yeah.
Why can't we?
Right.
We talked about that
The
last
easiest
night.
way to do this lowest hanging fruit is to find one junior high or one high school where they would be willing to undergo this training for everybody. And then just study it,
Just
and do
study it,
call it
yeah.
like a pilot study.
The fellows can go teach.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of junior highs and high schools to pick from, and then we can just set a model. That is a kind of interesting idea.
And have to be followed for the, many decades to come, which I'm sure this fellowship will still be around.
We have to find the right school, but
Yeah.
we could do that. We could find the right school and teach this course about, you know, everything, direct pressure, when to call 911, CPR,
Yeah.
shortness of breath, you know.
First aid and survival type stuff.
Yeah.
Just to kind of do comfort level, how do you feel before the course, after the course,
And it's
in
a-
the interim?
Right, and it's a model, and then we can look at all the emergencies in that school over the next year. There might not be any, but we could just look at them. We could look at skills retention and how this helped, and what, you know, even like home, like what happened when they took the information home. Bob, what do you think? I mean, we have to pick the right school,
And that's gonna be your issue.
right? Because some will say no, or some will push politics ahead of anything else, and we'll have to go through red tape. But I'm sure asking a lot of people, we could find one place to say,
Yeah. Yeah. Finding the right school is gonna be your major hurdle. Once you've found that and got the buy-in, I think you can do it.
yeah. All right.
One more, another question that or another comment that was brought up was that an issue for lay people is they don't know how hard to push when doing CPR. So the conversation in office was pretty much some people are afraid to break ribs or afraid what kind of trauma they can cause, what it might be like, and never having practiced it or anything like that. Just the fear of the unknown, I guess, of if the situation came up, I'm afraid that I'm going to hurt someone by doing CPR.
Person is dead.
Is exactly. So I think it's again,
They're
it just
almost
adds
dead.
into the education. I mean,
But that's
you
what they
can't
need.
harm
They need
them.
somebody who's done it. Who's like,
mostly
no, I've done
dead.
CPR. Here's what.
But we know
here's the
10% of the
situation.
time
Yeah.
we do compressions when the person has a pulse, 10% of the time by
Yeah.
bystander studies. I mean, we know that, right, and we know this whole thing of 5 to 10 seconds for a pulse, so it takes you 20 seconds to make sure there is or isn't a pulse, that's okay, right? A few seconds more is okay.
If you start doing compressions on someone and tell you to stop, then just stop.
Right, right. That's one of my top 10 rules, like, if the person's telling you to stop, you probably should stop.
You don't say, no, be quiet, I gotta
Although
do what
there's
I'm
always
doing."
the rare, VFib,
I knew
you're
you'd say
refusing
that.
them
Stop-
so well.
stop saying
I
that.
had that happen a number of times. You're doing such great compressions that the patients wake up and they say, "What the heck are you doing?" Recently, Tagore had a case, and she's talking to him. He's making jokes and chatting with her while he's pushing on her chest. As soon as he stopped, perfusion goes away, and she's
Right.
back out again.
But the reason we report these cases is because they're so
Rare.
incredibly rare.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think, just do it. You got no downside. The person's dead or almost dead, it's like.
Mostly dead.
And we can sit here thinking about it and come up with 1,000 different reasons for why not to do CPR and what the bad things are gonna happen if we do it. And while we're coming up with all those 1,000 reasons, that person is
This would be
certainly
a
not
great
gonna
study.
survive.
I like this. And we could call it the safest junior high in the world, right? And we could market it, and everybody loves these kind of stories. The safest high school in the world, where everybody has a training and we make up some name for this course.
You could do mock codes and just see, have
But you know
Kid
what else
from
we do,
each grade
Josh?
kind of
We
respond.
also take
Who's on
about
your way?
25% of the curriculum and focus on health and wellness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we say that we'll say doctors focus on everything that happens after you get the disease. We're going to focus on everything
Absolutely.
before the disease. But we're going to do it differently because we're going to show you science of why you should eat right and why you should do this and why you should do that. We get them to buy in based upon education, not because they're kids. They won't buy in based upon us just saying so. They'll buy in based upon us proving it to them.
Yeah, we're in a new world in terms of, all this stuff with wellness and well-being and everything. And I personally think we're going at it the wrong way. We need to look at this very differently now. A lot of prevention and stuff, like with the technological age, all the digital stuff, everything that is going on, and the way our interactions are with people. We're in this rapid decline or I guess we're declining so much in terms of our well-being. Our depressions have been going up, suicide rates have been going up. We need to switch from fixing people from being depressed and from committing suicide to preventing this from happening.
In fact, that was my question to Diane Cloud last night, who runs the Poison Control Center. What are you most worried about right now? And what was her answer besides a couple other things? It was this is the season for teenage suicide.
And it's so easy, because you go online, there are groups for everything. Where we had people that did crazy things back in the day, they were the only one who did that crazy thing within 50 miles of them. So they would do their crazy thing, and then they'd be like, I'm the only crazy person over here, so I'm going to stop. Now you go online, all of a sudden you got 10,000 people that are doing the same crazy thing, and they can
Pod
all do
challenge.
it together.
Pod
So,
challenge,
you know,
exactly.
there's a whole community for that.
We could put
And-
medical bags in the school, we could put BVMs, we could put nasopharyngeal airways, we could teach them anything we wanted.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, they don't fall under OEMS, so we can teach these guys whatever we want to.
We're gonna have.
And we can educate the teachers too, how about that?
Yeah.
You know what, what an even better model, besides educating the students, we educate the teachers, and they educate the students.
Yeah, we
every
do
quarter.
train the trainer model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was in medical school, one of the things that I helped out with in medical school was something that we called the mini medical school for the community, and essentially.
Yeah, a lot of medical schools do that.
Yeah, and essentially we had all of the local high schools. I mean, we only had 3,000 people in my town where I went to school, but that's irrelevant. We had a lot of students who voluntarily came in and wanted to learn this stuff, and we taught them just the basics of AED, showed them videos on how to use an AED, how to apply pads.
You guys know this, right? You've heard
practice
this,
stuff. It's
mini
great.
medical school,
Yeah.
where
Yep.
people go and they get people who like come in droves because they want to hear the stuff.
It was, we ended up, it got so full, we didn't have enough space that we ended up having to do it multiple times a year. And we got great feedback, and more people, students would go back and tell their friends, then more people would come in. We made it very simple. It was like one night a week, or for like 2 hours, one night a week for like 3 weeks, something like that. And the first 2 weeks were structured. This is what we were going to teach: AEDs, breathing, bleeding control, just basic stuff. And then on the third week, we let them kind of decide, hey, what do you guys want to learn based on what your interests are? And we kind of pulled it and did a third week where we did that. It was really,
I
it was
get to
actually really
see
neat.
this though, a special on Oprah, the safest school in America.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we're creating a model for other people to use, right? That's why people will pay attention to it.
I see a Nobel Peace Prize in the future.
So, I mean, Bob, can we start tonight? I can be back to like a 10. We just start tonight. We have to find the right school. So the most challenging part will be to find the right school with the teachers and the principals who are most willing to do this.
Right.
And then by them doing it, then the people across the street will do it. And then they'll create competition, and then everybody will do it because everybody wants to be just as good. All right, who's going to undertake this project? All right, we'll think about this. This would be great for the incoming people too.
Yeah.
All right, can we just do the IO article before I get, or the IV fluids article before I get one more email about this, one more silly email about this study.
Who's doing the IO article? Guys?
Peter
Yeah.
and Drew.
Yep.
We'll do the IO article. You want to start off, Peter, and then we'll chime in?
Now, for some reason, everybody in the world paid attention to this study.
Yeah. Just
It-
like
it
the
just-
Italian syncope PE study, all of a sudden, you know.
Oh, God, there are people who say this all the time. We talked about this ad nauseum. He passed out, so let's get it. Sure, he
Let's
passed
get a
out.
CT
Let's
scan.
CT their head, for God's sakes, because stop doing this. Stop doing this. Stop doing this. Stop getting a CAT scan because somebody passed out. Right.
On the
Period.
chest or the head, depending.
Right. So now we-
Pan scan.
If you want to get a CAT scan of their head, if they syncopate, just give me a good reason. Like they can't move one side of their body anymore. You know, something, or they're not waking up, right? But they're fine. They're in bed 2, wherever bed 2 is, and they look perfect, and they're waiting for a CAT scan of their head. And then we stumble across some subarachnoid cyst that has nothing to do why they passed out. All right, sorry.
I know why these are so popular too, because this is to like medicine and medical people. This is those like flashy news stories, right?
Right.
3 cups of coffee is more likely to make you buy a cat. Like it's like
Yeah.
catchy news stories.
Right. These are
This is like,
observational studies.
oh, IO, I know that thing. Oh, wow. I mean, we use IO all the time. It's worse. Oh my gosh.
They've led us down the wrong path with everything's observational studies
Yes.
over and over and over again.
Yes.
So this is another observational study. It's called intraosseous vascular access is associated with lower survival and neurologic recovery among patients with out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So essentially what they did is they wanted to see, they compared IO versus IV in cardiac arrest, and they looked at the neurologic recovery and the outcome. So they used the data from this, the PrimeMed study, which they've pulled from this data a lot. It's essentially a large data group from 2007 to 2009. The original study was using impedance valves in cardiac arrest.
Which we've talked about in many, many previous journal clubs.
And so what they did is they essentially pulled the data, and they wanted to look at, in these cardiac arrests, did they get an IO, did they get an IV, and what was the outcome on hospital discharge. What they found is they had essentially 13,000 cardiac arrests, 660, which is about 5%, received IO, and only 1.5% had a favorable neurological outcome, compared with 7.6% if they had an IV. So what they're saying is that if you have an IO, you have less of a chance of a good outcome. We kind of already talked about the background of this, of why they're doing this study. You know, this was done in 2007, 2009 data set, which is when IO was kind of becoming more and more big, especially with EMS. Talked about the goals, you know, what they used, like we said, the Pri-Med study, which they used and they pulled the data from.
Did they say why they used a data set that was 10 years old?
I don't know if it was just, they didn't say why, you know, I think it's an easy data set, but I don't like the fact that it's 10 years old. That's
So
one of my
striking,
issues with
isn't
it. I agree, yeah. And so what this study essentially looked at, just real quick, this data set is basically anyone 18 years or older who had an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. They essentially excluded pregnant patients, DNRs, or if it had to do with like exsanguination or severe burns. And then they classified IV and IO in it. So the outcomes, as we just talked about, was that essentially IV was better than IO. IO had worse outcomes. Looking at the data set as a whole, if you look at it, there's a couple issues with this. The big thing, and that what me and Andrew were just talking about, is that the people in the IO group were a lot sicker. Most of them had non-shockable rhythms compared, so for instance, in the IO group, 86% had a non-shockable rhythm. In the IV group, 73%. Bystander, in the IO group, there were only 34% with bystanders, 41 without, including like 90% in the IO group were non-public. In the IV group, that was 83%. So you had a sicker amount of people in the IO group, and they obviously did worse. What else do we have?
I mean, less people got therapeutic hyperthermia, which means they had best
hospital treatments as well.
The
that's
hospital
right.
treatment was different. There were the ROSC rate was 23% in the IO group and 40% in the IV group, and that was the data point that they focused in on.
Yeah.
But look at some of the other, what was the other main thing? The time to the ALS scene, right? They were a little bit different, and there was one other. Let me pull it up here. The electrical defibrillation rate. In the IO group, there were 25% of them got defibrillation. It's either yes they got it or no they didn't. And then in the IV group, 42%. Like, that's a big difference. Why was it so different? Probably because, especially this was early on in 2007, IOs were gaining traction. This is, I'm sure, before the humeral head IO placement got traction. This is probably somebody who, like when I was just rolling these out, and when I was in the EMS myself at this time, it was like, we can't get IV 3 or 4 times. Okay, now we try the IO. We're already way down this pathway, right? This is probably the last ditch effort, and that's probably why these people also had shockable rhythm rates or got defibrillation rates way less. They're already dead, right? So yes, the IO is very ineffective on dead people. But that I think that's why we have such a problem with this study. And in addition, the number of people who got IO is 660 compared to 12,000. So I think there's a big potential for bias just by that fact itself. And more importantly, because this is early on in the days of IO, to repeat the study now, I think we would get absolutely, totally different results. Because the way we use it in 2017 and 18 is absolutely drastically different than the way I was trained to use it when I was doing it myself in the field.
Is there anything in the study that talks about the type of IO delivery device they use, like a Jamshidi versus an easy IO?
They don't talk about
They don't
it.
mention it.
There's so much kind of missing important data, as well as the
They don't
difference in
mention
the
site,
groups.
they don't mention device.
And of course, we don't endorse any specific device.
Right. Thank you.
Right, and it may have been just also a mindset, right? Especially back in 2007, it probably was, we've got to get IV access, that's the most important thing, and only if that fails, then we revert to IO. meaning that person is already 20 minutes down the pathway into the cardiac arrest. So just by that very nature, that's such huge bias, I don't think you can draw conclusive results out of it, because you're dealing with a population that it's not the same as if you randomized to IV or IO, and I think you'd get a way different, just all of our own personal anecdotal experience in the ER and in the field says that, wait, this doesn't quite make sense. However, and that's why I was so surprised that it was in Annals of Emergency Medicine.
Yeah, that was.
I'm really surprised about that, but I think
Yeah.
it goes to show probably a lot of the people who are using this are not as familiar with it as we are in EMS.
When
So-
we made our protocol change, when we started EasyIO, that it used to be you had to try 2 or 3 IV
Right.
attempts.
That's
And
how I
when
was
we
trained
made
on it as
that,
well.
when we made that change to, you could do it first line in cardiac arrest, we went up, we doubled the amount of IOs that we were doing. Because people were taking a quick look, nothing looks really good, bang, drilling it and go.
I don't even look for a line.
I mean, I'm all
Yeah.
for getting.
And I bet if we looked at
Dead
our
people
outcomes
get
at
IO.
Ross, I bet they went up as well. We
But,
probably
you know,
should.
the problem, just being fiscally responsible, is, pretty much, ALS, we build everything at ALS 1 level, right? There's only 2 charges, there's ALS 1 and ALS 2. 95% of what we do is ALS 1. And if we do more IOs, then we don't get paid anymore.
But an IO is an ALS2 procedure.
And okay, but we still don't,
Probably still don't recover costs.
Yeah.
All
Right.
things told, that's for sure.
Right.
I,
But
I,
it-
I totally get what you're saying, Drew, it makes perfect sense, because all that, I still that, ROSC is a big difference in the 2 groups. That's, can everything you were saying explain away that big difference?
I'm not sure. But so you're right, I think that is a big difference, and that's not to be ignored. But I suspect it's because of the way it was being used is probably the big difference. Maybe not, but just kind of the other anecdotal experience. When I use an IV versus IO in the ER, I don't feel these differences. I don't have those same big barriers. So I suspect, especially because of the time period, just knowing it was a 2007 to 2009 data set, that may be the reason. Because I think myself, when I was first using this, I used it in an absolutely, totally different way than I do now. I don't know. What do you guys think? I think this one is a perfect study that needs to be duplicated. It would be probably hard to do randomized controlled, but looking at maybe a more modern data
Well, if you want
set.
to randomize this, you have to do it outside the United States.
Right.
Nobody,
Yes, that's
nobody
the
in the
problem.
US is going to be
Right.
able to do this, right?
But-
And
but maybe
probably
if
want to
you're
write a
more
protocol
retrospective.
where half the time they can't do IOs in sick people.
Which is easy, right? We have a paper that says the IV was better, but.
But I think we do enough IOs first line in cardiac arrest that we would have pretty decent numbers. Because we do 50 to 60 IOs a month in a cardiac arrest situation. And we do, I want to say that's half of our cardiac arrest.
Yeah, I think
So
our
we
data
are-
would be tough though, because if, with, various response times, again, at a certain point, I don't think it matters if you have an IV or an IO, because,
They're dead.
right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm all for getting IVs. I think if you have the resources available and you have the person put an IV in. If you don't, and you're by yourself, maybe it's better to put an IO in. I think it probably depends on where you're working as well.
Yeah.
But it is hard to say. If you're looking at this and you see it, like you said, if you see 24% ROS versus 38, it's a big difference.
Yeah. So, AJ, this just doesn't make clinical sense to us. What do you think?
Let's see. I'm not really sure where to start on this one.
Tell me that you hated this statistically.
Say it again.
Tell me you didn't like this statistically. How were the stats?
Statistically, there's a lot of missing valid variables, especially in Table 1. I don't think they could have been multiple imputation on the IV group, but they did. Show an effect size. I like the fact they used frequency score matching. That kind of demonstrated the effect in the favor of IV.
And just before you just give me a good definition of propensity score matching.
Let's see. In a generalistic format, propensity score matching is basically overlapping two scatter plots with your IV and your IO group, and then putting those two dots to its nearest other dot, and then that makes like your propensity score group.
I got
It's
it.
basically just putting the scatter plots overlay and connecting the closest ones, and then making a group out of that.
Okay.
I mean, the study is favoring IV, although, as you guys stated, there's a lot of methodology issues with it. If you have a question, I can state it, but I think we're over time right now, aren't we?
Yeah. Do you guys have a specific question?
No.
So we basically want, we have difficulty believing this, we want a better study, and we have reasons to believe that the difference isn't so real.
I think if you used a data set from 2012 to 2017, you would get different results.
Yeah. All right. Okay, that's good. I want to stay on time, so thanks for showing up to Journal Club. We will be here next week. We'll put more articles on the website. Thanks everybody who came to our EMS dinner. By the way, if you want to hold it on your calendar, next year is May 20th, which is Tuesday of EMS week, 2019. We will probably be at the same location. And thanks for tuning in. We will see you next week.
Okay, and we are done.